Today on the table of content, we talk with Joe Potts, one of our writers and contributors to We Are One Body Audio Theater. We'll dig a little deeper into where Joe comes from, what stirs him up when it comes to creativity, and how he got involved with audio theater. Stay tuned, all that coming up on the table of content. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us here on another episode of The Table of Content, where we talk about everything cool, hip, new, and awesome happening with We Are One Body Audio Theater. I am your host, Albert Saenz, and today we have joining us, not in studio, but joining us for this session, Joe Potts. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Albert. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, such a great pleasure to have you. And let me give a disclaimer to everyone who hears this episode. This is in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is obviously causing great turmoil across the world. But we are continuing on as best that we can here at We Are One Body Audio Theater. So we are doing all of this remotely. So Joe is in the comfort of his own home. I am in the comfort of my cold basement, but nevertheless, we are making this happen. So we're giving leeway to any extra noises that you may hear as a listener, whether it be clocks chiming, cats meowing, or children in the background. So without any further delay, let's get into this and talk more with Joe. Joe, so I'm curious because I know you as the writer and contributor to audio theater, but I don't know you outside of that realm. And I'm curious as to, is writing your whole past, or was there something else that you did before you picked up the mighty pen and paper?
Albert, there's all kinds of things that I did because I really didn't get started much in writing until about 20 years ago. I am a retired engineer. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, went to Carnegie Mellon University, where I got a degree in mechanical engineering, and had a career in the engineering field. But I was always interested in writing. In fact, when I went to Carnegie Mellon, I took as many English literature courses as I could because I was very interested in that. And I also loved reading books and the newspaper all the time. I read the weekly columns by humor writers, which interested me a lot. But it wasn't until I was about 50 that I started actually doing some real writing. I had fiddled around a little bit here and there, but at that time I thought, I want to try a bit of writing, and I was interested in humor columns. So I started writing humor articles and submitting them to the local newspapers, where I had a little bit of success doing that.
So I'm kind of really caught up on the point that you are doing engineering. So it seems like a huge contrast to do engineering and then you have writing on the other side. Was that surprising to you, or did that feel natural to kind of have the creative side over and then engineering on the other?
Well, I'll tell you, Albert, it was a little bit odd. I sort of felt like an engineer who should have been something else, maybe.
Yeah.
In fact, the reason I became an engineer was because I was so interested in the space program. And of course, I read a lot of science fiction. And at the time I was in high school, I read a little pamphlet written by Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist, who said, here at NASA, we employ mostly mechanical engineers. And I said, well, by golly, that's what I'm going to be then. But I was always interested in writing and always felt like that was something I should be doing. My mother, when I was in high school, had suggested, why don't you become a technical writer? And by golly, she had something there. That might have been a good career path.
Uh-huh. Well, so let's move ahead now a little bit. So you say you started actually writing about 20 years ago, and I take it that was in the midst of your career.
That's correct.
So there must have been sort of, I'm guessing, a transition as you start to sort of head towards the end of your regular career. Your writing is becoming a greater part of your life. And did you feel kind of that draw? You could sort of see the end of your engineering career and you could see the writing as sort of a large light at the end of the tunnel?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I felt like then I would have the time that I needed to devote to writing, and also the energy, because now when you're young, you can work all day and then do all kinds of things in the evening. When you start to get towards retirement age, you find that by the time you get home from work, maybe you don't have as much energy as you'd like to throw into the writing. And so, yes, I was looking forward to the time when I was retired, and whatever time and energy I had, I could devote to my writing.
So, can you remember clearly that point when you finally kind of came to an end of your regular career? Was there a point in your thinking or your emotions where you kind of felt finally completely free to just completely give yourself to your writing?
Oh, sure. Actually, I remember walking out of the parking lot thinking, as you say it, I'm free. And not to put too fine a point on it.
Sure.
But yeah, and then I really did start to write more, and also think about what kinds of things did I want to write. At that time, as I said, I was concentrating purely on short humor articles. And, some of my heroes when I was very young were the humor writers.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like I said, I was also very much into science and science fiction, and, read not only the classic pieces such as, by H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, that type of thing, but also, the big writers at the time, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, those kind of people. So I also, and I was also a big Twilight Zone fan.
Rod Serling all the way.
Yeah, I mean, and at that time, so many people felt that way. The Twilight Zone just took, particularly, I feel, young people by storm, and who didn't want to be Rod Serling,
Well, I have a question for you on two fronts. I'm going to quiz you. So first, on the Twilight Zone, favorite Twilight Zone episode?
Little Girl Lost, where a married couple can hear their daughter calling for help, but they can't see her.
Oh, yeah.
This is in her bedroom. And she, as it turns out, she has fallen through an interdimensional hole that is in their wall there, and can't make the transition back to our plane of existence.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, fortunately for them, they lived right next door to a physicist who understood all that kind of stuff.
Of course. How convenient. I can't pick out a favorite episode, but the one episode when I think of the Twilight Zone that stands out the most to me is the one with a very young William Shatner, and he's on the airplane, and he sees out the window that creature, and it's the middle of a storm. The airplane's trying to get to where it's going, and he keeps seeing it, and no one believes him. And of course, it continues to come closer and closer until it finally sort of gets him, and still no one ever sees him. And it's him kind of deranged by the end of it all because no one believed him, but there was that monster creature out of the window. That's the one that I always think about when I think about the Twilight Zone.
I remember that one very well. That was in the final season, and the author of that one, because I don't think that was a Rod Serling, I think that might have been a Richard Matheson story. He said, and I have to agree with him, he was disappointed in the way they made the creature look. And I agree with that. The story's a great story, but in carrying it off on TV, perhaps they could have made the creature look a bit less clown-like.
Sure. Well, let's kind of move on, because I could keep talking about old authors and old shows, but let's bring it up to speed and let's get to audio theater. How did you even get involved with We Are One Body audio theater?
Well, after I retired, I became aware of a writing group near me called the Delmont Area Writers Group, or DOGS for short. And it met on Wednesday mornings. Now, while I was working, obviously, I could not attend, but once I retired, I started attending that writers group. And sometime after that, Greta Lynn evidently wrote to various local writing groups, telling them about audio theater and saying, do you have anyone who wants to write stories? And so that's how I first heard of it. Honestly, up until that time, I did not know that it existed. Mm-hmm. And also at that time, I had not written any fiction. And so, but as coincidence would have it, an idea had been kicking around in my mind for a story. And so I thought, well, maybe I should try writing this and see what happens. And so that's what I did. And that story became The Test, which was my first story on the audio theater.
And since that first story, you've had the joy, I hope, of writing more stories for us. One notably that I want to focus on here before we lose too much time is you got to kind of, you were the creator of our first show, our first episodic show, Electron Jones. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit about the creation of Electron Jones, a little bit of your inspiration, and how you felt be able to hear it fully cast and put together with sound effects and the full shebang, if you will.
Well, another favorite of mine through the years was Sherlock Holmes.
Sure.
And so I had thought from time to time of possibly writing a Sherlock Holmes type story. Now, somewhere around that same time, I was reading an article, I believe, about subatomic particles, and it just occurred to me that Electron sounded like a pretty neat name for a character. And so as I thought about writing a Sherlock Holmes story, I thought, well, I should mix this with my love of science fiction, and we'll put this guy in the future somewhere, in a totally different existence from what we have here. And that, in a nutshell, is how Electron Jones came about. I tried to make him be something like a futuristic Sherlock Holmes. Now, as far as the productions, I mean, I can hardly describe what it's like to hear people that are way more talented than I am take this and turn it into something, that in my mind is so wonderful. The characters just, to me, jump off the page, or I guess maybe off the screen, out of the screen. from the performances that people bring to Electron Jones. And then, of course, having theme music written for it and sound effects. It's, I mean, when I thought about being a writer, I never envisioned something like that. So it's really, to me, pretty incredible. And it makes you realize then that the story, when you hear the final product, you realize it's much better than what you wrote.
Sure, sure. I mean, I remember getting cast as the narrator and being able to give sort of that sort of overview or that energy to the storyline. You know, kind of sounding like a film noir sort of type of radio broadcast. You know, I remember that intro saying Electron Jones. You know, it just was this great sort of fun production to be a part of. And you know, Dennis being cast as Electron Jones gave I think he was the perfect Electron, and Dana Rizzo being, you know, the faithful sidekick, sort of picking up the Watson sort of persona. It just was such a great story that you put together, and I think you are entitled to feel sort of really great about the way that we sort of made that production come together.
Well, thank you, Albert. And I agree on Dennis and Dana. And the whole cast, they did terrific jobs.
Yeah, I think that for all of us, it was such a great first step into episodic programs. And I think we have to tip our hats to you for giving us such great content to work with on Electron Jones. We're kind of running up against the end of our time here, Joe, but I want to thank you for taking some time to be with us for this episode. But I also want to extend a big thanks to you for just the time that you take and the care you put into your writing, because we're able to share such good stories with everyone who listens. So thanks for being inspired many, many years ago in the midst of engineering classes to take as much writing and English classes as you did, because I think we can see the fruits of all of that time spent where it is now. So thank you very much for using your creative talents and sharing them.
Well, thank you, Albert, and thank you for having me.
I want to encourage everyone, if you want to hear more Joe Potts, and he also actually offers his voice talents from time to time, go to our website, waobaudiotheater.org, or look us up at We Are One Body Audio Theater if you can't remember that web address. Go to our contributor bios, look up Joe Potts, and you'll find all of the stories that he's contributed to, whether it was writing or his voice talent, and particularly take a listen to Electron Jones. It's a great series. Joe, thanks again for being with us, and I want to thank everyone out there for listening, and I wish everyone well and peace, and join us again for the Table of Content.